All right, everyone, we're about to begin. Hi, my name is Precious Wilson Gay, and I am the Mobile Unit Community Programs Manager. And it is my honor to welcome you all to the 4th International Shakespeare in Prisons Conference. Very, very excited to see all these faces. I am new, so I do not know most of you, but I do see a few familiar faces. So nice to see you all. I hope you guys are having a great day, and I am going to pass it on to the next person to be introduced.
Hi, I'm Kurt Toftlin. I'm the founder of Shakespeare Behind Bars, co-founder of this Shakespeare in Prison network with my partners Scott Jackson and Peter Holland of Shakespeare at Notre Dame. And I'm really excited to see so many of you join us on our opening foray into what we, the planning committee, are calling the longest conference in the history of the world. This kicks it off. We're not going to do the standard conferences that you've all been to, where you wear yourself out, exhaust yourself in 3 days with lots of programming and partying. But we are going to have events each week, and I want to thank the planning committee who are beginning to introduce themselves. We just had a terrific team to put this together, so welcome. And I'll pass it on.
Hi, everyone. I'm Melinda Cooper. I am a professional project manager and a co-producer of this conference. Some of you may recall my face from the past conference or some of our past virtual sessions that we've done. I'm also one of the co-facilitators of the Anti-Racism for White Folks ongoing workshop series. So if anyone wants more information about that, please shoot me a message directly in the chat. And I'm also going to drop in the agreements, and you can just click open the file and review them on your own time so that we're not spending a lot of time going over ground rules, okay? Thank you all so much for joining us. It's an honor to be here, and I will kick this ball along to Freedome Bradley-Ballentine. Freedome?
Thank you, Melinda. Hi, I'm Freedome Bradley-Ballentine. I'm a Black man wearing glasses with a hoodie and a black jacket with some paisley designs on it, sitting in front of a purple and white wall. How you all doing? I will be yapping a lot later, so I do not need to be yapping that much now. It's good to see all of you old friends and some new friends. Take care. I'm passing it along to, I think, Karen Ann Daniels. Am I passing it along to
you? Are correct. Hi, everyone. I'm Karen Ann Daniels. I currently work at the Public Theater as the director of the mobile unit, where we are in the process of, Precious and I are about to actually launch a mobile unit in corrections program. You may have seen me back in June when we did talk about what does it mean to program in the midst of COVID, and for us it was a especially pertinent question because we had been of course derailed with our plans at that point, but we've been able to find a new way, and very much thanks to being part of a network like this where we can lean in to each other to discover some new things about how to operate in this world as it is shifting underneath our feet. So I'm so happy you all are here to just kick this off with us. And I'm going to kick the ball now to Mr. Scott Jackson.
Thanks, Karen Ann. Hey, I'm Scott Jackson. I'm the Mary Irene Ryan Executive Director of Shakespeare at Notre Dame and a co-founder of the Shakespeare in Prisons Network. Started on this project 8 long years ago with Kurt Toftlin and Peter Holland, and here we are at our 4th biennial gathering, some of which some of you have been to all 4. So welcome back, welcome home. It's been a long road to pivot ourselves to this moment. So we thank you for your patience, and we're so excited about what content and what conversations and what communion we're going to have together over these next few months, honestly. So in that same vein, I'd also really like to highlight a few families who have been indispensable in creating this conference And that's the McMeal family and the McMeal Family Foundation and the Ryan Memorial Foundation. These two families have stood behind this conference since the very beginning. And especially in this year of COVID, this conference simply would not happen without their support. And I'd also really like to thank our partners at the Folger Institute, and most specifically Owen Williams, for believing in our conference and creating it as part of their Institute series as well. So welcome to all the Folger Consortium folks who are with us tonight. Now it's my great honor to introduce Henry Frank. And before I do that, I would like for us all just to take a moment, to just take a pause, to bring us into this space and to open this space with our hearts forward. So if we can just take a couple moments of silence and just breathe together. Inhaling, exhaling. Bringing our attention down to our heart. Giving ourselves permission to feel joy and to just feel in this moment. Thank you. Now at this moment, I would like to ask you all to mute your video and audio so that we can give space to Henry. And in this moment, as Henry blesses the opening of this conference and just blesses us all here as a community, I want to encourage everyone to, if you have one, to drop a land acknowledgement into the chat. Introduce yourself. Tell us where you're from. Tell us the ancestral roots of your particular region. And here's mine right here. And I'm going to give you some resources. If you don't have a land acknowledgement, this is a beautiful time to take the next few minutes to craft one. Here's a link that tells you the different tribal nations that have inhabited your region. And here is a second link about what goes into a land acknowledgement. Oh, that didn't work. Pardon me. Here we go. Perfect. So it's my great honor to introduce Henry Frank. Henry is from the Yurok and Pomo Kashia nations. He's a bear dancer and has poured water for ceremonies and tended fires up and down the state of California. He's an active member of the Marin American Indian Alliance, and he currently serves as the vice president of the board of the Museum of the American Indian in Novato, California. He believes that religion is man-made, but that spirituality is given to us from the Creator. And that is where understanding, love, community, compassion, and acceptance come from. Henry is the communications and programs assistant for the William James Association, which is an organization that provides qualified art, music, drama, and creative writing instructors and a space for incarcerated individuals to learn new skills. When he was released from prison in 2013, after serving 20 years, he wanted to give back to the arts and corrections, which provided him a safe place to be himself and also to improve his artistic skills. While he was in these classes, he learned the feeling of pride of completing a painting, a print, or a group project. He learned how to communicate with others that he would not normally talk to outside of the classroom. He was shown what humanity looked like through the instructors' dedication to the programs and their genuine interest in their students. He knew he needed to be a part of this compassionate organization. Once the pandemic is over, Henry will be an artist instructor inside of the California Medical Facility to co-teach drawing and murals. So literally, the student has become the instructor. Henry's a professional artist, a printmaker, photographer, and small business owner. He's been a poet, a writer, a collagist, a ceremonial dancer and singer, and a regalia maker. And his artwork has been in numerous museums across the country, art shows, galleries, magazines, and university. And his artwork is in the private collections of the Library of Congress. It's my pleasure to introduce Henry and to start where we left off in San Diego in 2018 with his beautiful blessing as he closed our circle at the Old Globe. And we welcome him to open that circle right back up for us. Take it away, Henry.
Oh, well, thank you, Scott, and thank you for the committee for this conference, for honoring me to come back and open this ceremony for everybody here. And I know we're connected on Zoom right now, and but I'm going to connect us through our minds and through our hearts so we can be one collective entity and really honor the work that we do. And I acknowledge that I'm on the ancestral lands of the Miwoks here in Novato. And also just like to say just special prayers for all the people that are out there that are dealing with the COVID and that have lost people to the COVID and that have suffered through the COVID, and just keep them in prayer and keep them in healing. Because as a nation, as one nation, no matter what race you are, no matter what tribe you are, no matter where you came from, we're one nation, we're the human nation. And if we collectively pray together, then things will change. Things have changed and things will be better. And so I'm going to burn the sage for all of us, no matter where you're at. We're together right now. We're going to connect our spirits. And the sage, what it does is just asks any negativity that may be with any of us to leave us right now, because this is a good and cleansed circle that we're in right now. And so I'm going to offer up two songs. The first song is going to be a spirit calling song to call us all here, to open up our hearts spiritually, to get on the right page, and so that nobody's in conflict. Everybody's just trying to be helpful to one another, learn from one another, and just come to a shared understanding so we can improve what we are doing. And what I've learned is that we're all ceremony. So when we go into those prisons and jails, wherever it is that we're going, that we're taking a ceremony with us, and we're doing the work that, you know, Creator or whoever it is that you pray to that has blessed us to do this work. And we might not ever get to see the result, but we know that the results are happening. And so I call those spirits in to help us to become one, to become stronger. And then the second one is a healing song for all of us, because we pick up negativity sometimes, knowing it and not knowing it. And so we just need to clean ourselves right now. And so we don't take it and give it to somebody else and the people inside and your family, whoever it may be. We need to just give it back to the Creator so he can do the work that he needs to do. to the healing song. So think of whatever it is that you need healed, that you need help with. And if you're okay, then think about your loved ones, a friend, a person that's inside that maybe they shared a problem or something that was ailing them, and just keep them in mind so we can collectively send our spirit, our strength, our compassion to that person for their healing. Hey, wala, hey, wala, hey, wala, hey, wala, hey, wala, hey, wala, hey, wala. Thank you, Creator. Thank you for the spirits that have us. Thank you for the people that are here that are willing to sacrifice some of their time to give to others without wanting anything in return. And I know that we are only instructors, but I know we're doing the work. We're passing on the medicine that we have as individuals. And I know that for personal experience, Creator, that have changed lives, and not only mine, but the younger generation and their children and their children. And so we're affecting many generations just for spending the few hours that we do with the people that we help. Thank you, Creator, for giving us the compassion and the strength to go through it every day, every time that we walk in and walk out and leave people in there that we wish we could take out. Thank you, Creator, for giving us that dedication and responsibility. Oh, all my relations. And thank you once again for allowing me to do the blessing for you.
Thank you, Henry. Just to give a little bit of historical memory, I had been in conversation with Peter Holland over the years about the possibility of doing a conference of prison arts practitioners. And every time we talked about it, he thought it's a good idea. I figured since he was at Notre Dame, he had the infrastructure to be able to do it. And yet we never seemed to get around to doing it. And then as fate would have it, I was at a conference in the Netherlands, and at the conference, I met Tom McGill. And I knew Tom McGill, lives in Northern Ireland. He was a prison arts practitioner like myself. I knew him through his film, Mickey B. And he was presenting, I was presenting, we became very good friends. And before we left each other, I said, I'm going to get you to the United States. And he said, I'm going to get you to Northern Ireland. You'll probably get me to the United States before I get you to Northern Ireland. And so that was our pledge to each other. And immediately when I got back, I phoned up Peter and I said, because Peter's a Shakespeare on film expert, and I said, I met the writer, director, filmmaker of Mickey B, and we talked about that for a bit. And then I said, I'd like to bring him here. But Shakespeare Behind Bars is not a wealthy organization, and I'm wondering if perhaps Notre Dame, you might find the funding to do it. And he said, "Oh yeah, we'll do something." And then a day later, he called me back and he said, "Why don't we do that conference that you were talking about, that we've been talking about?" So Tom was the impetus to get it going, and of course, immediately Scott Jackson was brought into the fold, and that's when we launched our first conference in November of 2013. It was a huge success. It came out of a need in myself to be with my group, my community of prison arts practitioners. Those of you that do it know that it's very lonely and quite isolated. And certainly back when I started in the early 90s, there was very little. So I was just looking to be together with my community to learn something and to share. And that was the impetus for it, that need to be with fellow friends. And it was a great success. And Peter said, "We'll host it again in 2 years because I know it's fragile and it may take a while to lift." So again, the great support of, as Scott mentioned at the top, the families that have supported us. Notre Dame supported us. And we did our second one in January of 2016. Probably not a very good idea to do a winter conference in South Bend. And of course, most of us got out of there, but some were trapped for another night because of a snowstorm. And that's where I met Freedom, and we started talking, and he was excited about the work that was happening at the Globe. And he went back and talked to Barry and the colleagues, and we were very blessed to be our third conference in March of 2018 at the old Globe. And that really exponentially blew us, made us so much bigger and connected us, and certainly brought this amazing members of this amazing planning committee, because we were going to do our next one back at Notre Dame. It's going to be a bit different because we were going to partner with the Folger Shakespeare Library. And then of course, COVID came and shut us down. We had to alter our plans and we moved towards a virtual conference. This is it. This is the launch of it. And we're looking forward to sharing the programming that we've already recorded. We've got ongoing programming that we're working on. We've got great speakers, we've got great panels, we've got great presentations. So we're really, really happy that we can continue to do that. It's not quite the same, not being in the room where it happened, but it approximates. For me, as I'm sure it is for you, extremely difficult to be locked out of the prisons, to be away from our circles, our family, our friends, our brothers and sisters. As difficult as it is for me, I recognize that it's monumentally more difficult for them. And so I know we'll all hold them in our thoughts as we get together to share. And I'm so grateful that we have returned citizens who will be with us and on many of the panels and participating. That's with such great joy that they have come and been involved with us. For my boys here in Western Michigan, I just have something that I'd like to share. I come from a place of abuse, addiction, anxiety, bullying, depression, isolation, loneliness, mistrust, shame, suicide, trauma, violence, worthlessness. To survive, I numbed my negative emotions, turned my back on the devil. But in numbing those emotions, I numbed the positive ones as well. I turned my back on the angels too. I learned how not to feel anything. There is a living death in becoming a feelingless, emotionless zombie, wandering on the periphery of life, carrying a broken heart. To heal my heart, I journeyed deeply into my past to examine and understand how I grew into those hurt-filled experiences. I took my place in that brutal world. Now, I build a connection from my hurt to the trust. I seek the compassion for myself that will allow me to discover the empathy, to embrace my vulnerability and become fully human. There is nothing more powerful than an act of love. There isn't anyone I can't love when I've heard their authentic story. My life story is being written in chalk, not ink. And now I'd like to introduce Karen Ann Daniels, who will introduce our guests for tonight. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kurt. Thank you so much, Henry. Thank you all for being here with us today. I just want to say, just right off the bat, how grateful I am to be sitting in this room with all of you who, like Kurt just said, that, you know, that we do this work from a very deep-seated calling and love. And that it's a very difficult time in many ways to not be able to activate that the way we are used to. And so I just want to lift all of you up before we get moving and say thank you all for hanging in there and doing whatever you can in the meantime. So it's such gratitude that I have for this community. I want to, before I introduce our next guest, just tell you a teeny bit about who they are. Now, typically we'd read their bios, but prior to being at the Public Theater, I was, of course, at the Old Globe. So the two people I'm about to introduce mean a lot to me. Oh, wow, I just got emotional. Anyhow, but they do. Back in about 2013, I moved back to San Diego, of which I am a native, and I got a position at the Old Globe, doing something that probably wasn't my perfect fit. And I remember sitting there one day in a meeting and hearing Barry talk, and he had just been there, I think, just at the end of his first year at the Globe. And he talked about this idea and this vision. And if I remember it correctly, it was like, what if we shifted 1% of what we normally did every year and just increased it in terms of who we were working with? And I remember sitting there as I was in my own personal place of just being like, I don't even know why I'm here. I don't even know if I should be in theater anymore. Like, this just feels like maybe not the road. But I heard that. It was like this little seed that kind of stuck to me. And I kind of, said to myself, I whispered to myself, maybe I'll hang out and see what happens. So, and I did. And I'm so glad I did, because that seed that Barry planted that day turned into, for me, being able to do a lot of wonderful things with the community that I love, both within the theater and broadly across San Diego. And so I'm personally very grateful for Barry Edelstein for taking that leap out of New York and coming to, little old San Diego where the sun do shine, and taking a chance on all of us with what he wanted to do, and also for allowing all of us to step into the work with him. And as part of that, Barry brought in Freedome Bradley-Ballentine, who is now the Associate Artistic Director and the Director of Arts Engagement for the Old Globe. And it was when Freedome arrived that I finally was able to feel like I knew exactly what I needed to be doing in this world of theater. And then if Freedome had not come, then I would not have met all of you, or Kurt, or Scott, and all of the wonderful people that I've been partnering up with to have this moment begin today. So that's how I want to introduce. Barry Edelstein is currently the artistic director, the Erna Finchi Viterbi. I still know how to say that, Barry. Artistic director of the Old Globe Theater, and Freedome Bradley-Ballentine, the Associate Artistic Director and Director of Arts Engagement. I would love for you to unmute your video and your cameras and just invite you to come into the room with me and talk about something that's just really important, that you all have been working on during this strange and wonderful time that we've all been living through this year. As you all know, many of us have, actually, before I go to that, I forgot to say that we are going to chit chat for a little bit, and then I will invite everybody to join the circle. I know we're in boxes, but I still like to think of it as a circle. And we will do some Q&A. So you can, and we would love for you to put any questions that you have along the way in the chat. And Scott and Melinda will be kind of surfing that, so that when we're done with this first part, that we can bring you all in. And then when we do, if we are reading one of your questions, we'll actually ask you to unmute yourself and actually ask your question yourself. Unless you don't want to, then you're more than welcome to let us know that too. But anyways, so welcome, Barry. Welcome, Freedome.
That's a nice story that you told. I'm touched by that. Thank you.
Welcome. We were talking beforehand, before everybody got here, and I literally hit me, and I was like, none of this would be possible.
Is at the very least subtle.
Excuse me. You want to mute yourself, please? Thank you. Oh, the Zoom life. It's so hard. But anyways, I was saying that it occurred to me that I wouldn't know any of the people in that room that day if it wasn't for Barry actually leaving New York. That's how the dominoes fell. So I'm really very grateful for a lot, more than you know.
Oh. Thanks.
I tell him that, and he gets bashful all the time. Like, I wouldn't be in San Diego if it wasn't for you. Why would I be in San Diego?
That's right. But you all, like so many of us, when COVID happened in March, everything came to a screeching halt, especially for the theater, and we're all still eagerly awaiting the opportunity to kind of get back to what we do in the form that we do it. But along the way, a couple of things have happened. We've had a few pandemics. And one of the things you all just published about a month ago now, is your social justice roadmap. And it feels very, especially this particular Monday, very, very just vibrant in terms of where we find ourselves as a country, as individuals, I'm thinking, and it's just very indicative of where we are in this strange time. So today's conversation is going to be us just chatting a little bit about what happened to propel you to do this. And I think the first question I want to ask is, what happened before you decided to do this? Where were you in your pathway in terms of social justice as a theater?
Well, I'll tell the part up to your arrival, Freedom. How's that? And then you take it from there. I'll do that. Well, first, thanks for having the Globe here. Thank you, Karen Ann, and everybody. It's nice to be with all of you virtually. And I want to begin on a note of humility. You know, the Globe's been doing this work, but we recognize that we're not the only theater doing this work. And we recognize that there are theaters around the country that have been doing it in a deeper way, in a more sustained way than we have. And we recognize in particular that there are theaters run by people of color, artists of color, who are in it in a deeper personal way than I could ever be. So I do want to begin with a note of humility as we talk about this document that of course we're proud of, but I want to try and put it in some kind of larger context. I got to the Globe in 2012. I had been at the Public doing what you're doing. I was in charge of Shakespeare at the Public. We called it the Shakespeare Initiative for about 6 years. And Oscar Eustis had the idea to revive the Public's mobile unit, which in the days of Joe Papp in the literally late 50s, 60s, and into the 70s was this touring Shakespeare unit that brought Shakespeare to the 5 boroughs, to community venues around New York City. And one of my proudest moments at the Public and one of my proudest legacies at the Public was recreating the mobile unit at the Public. And I mean, under your leadership, Karen Ann, it's grown to heights and depths of impact that I could never have dreamed would be possible. And it's wonderful to see where that program has gone. And that's where I first came in touch with working with incarcerated populations, which I hadn't done up until that point in my career. So it was a really extraordinarily eye-opening experience. When I got to the Globe, I noticed a couple of things. One, this theater that is a deep community asset, you know, as is true in the case of many regional theater cities around the United States, there's this dominant force, generally one big institution, if it's a museum or an orchestra or something, that just is the sort of leading edge of theater arts activity in that city. That's the Globe. It's so central to the identity of San Diego. Stands in the middle of Balboa Park, which is in the middle of the city. It's been there 85 years. You know, generations of families have been coming to the place. And it began as a community theater. It was not a professional operation in the 1930s. It was local people coming together, putting on shows, and over the course of decades became professionalized. When I got there, I noticed that the San Diego that I lived in and shopped in and drove around and did my life in looked really different from what the Globe looked like. The Globe was an almost 100% white institution in the middle of this city that is not that, in the middle of a city that is, I think, even at this moment, majority non-white. And I thought, got to do something about this. And so that sort of became what I wanted to do as the head of the old Globe. And one of the things I did was brought what I had learned about the mobile unit in, and we created a program we called Globe for All. And the Globe had at the time had some relationships with community-based organizations, mostly in a legacy education department that was based almost entirely in schools. But over the years, there had been a Spanish language Shakespeare program that kind of came and went, or other contacts with things like veterans organizations, senior centers, but mostly that was in ticketing and free tickets to shows. There weren't any really organized programs because the focus of the education department was so schools-based. So we started thinking about that. That led to a connection with the James Irvine Foundation, which is a gigantic arts philanthropy in the state of California, sadly no longer in the arts, to the detriment of arts institutions up and down the state, although they're now working on political engagement with the working poor in the state of California. So that's very, very important work. It's just sad to see them leave the arts. And we were invited to apply for a program called the New California Arts Fund, which was designed to move arts engagement toward the core of an organization. And it was a huge process. I mean, Karen Ann, you were so deeply involved. We got a grant to apply for a grant. It was like a year just to write a grant application, and they paid for us to do that. Amazing operation. An extraordinary woman named Josephine Ramirez, who's now at the Music Center in LA, that was her brainchild. And there are about 15 organizations up and down the state, theaters, orchestras, dance companies, other arts organizations that are in the New California Arts Fund, driving participatory community-based art making toward the center of the institution. And we got this grant, which was 1.7 million for 3 years. And so the very first thing that the Globe said we were going to do is make a Department of Arts Engagement, which would be at the senior level of the organization that would organize all these programs. And that's when I brought Freedome to San Diego. I knew him from my days at the Public. We had a wonderful, extraordinary moment where Freedome grabbed a Parks Department van and drove me around New York City, showing me all the places where the mobile unit could go. And we became friends, and I saw him, and I said, I got a job for you if you want to come to San Diego. And Freedome became the director of arts engagement. This was 5 years ago. So Freedome, you can take it from there.
Yeah. So when I came here, I remember, the work that that Barry was talking about doing, and I wasn't quite sure, what we were going to do at that time, but I knew that I had someone with integrity that I could work with, and we'll get to that as we talk about the work that we're doing. But I think one of the an integral part of this work of moving towards social justice, of moving toward an engagement level of programming, is making sure that you have integrity, personal integrity, and integrity with the people that you work with, because you're going into communities that have heard so many different times and so many different things and so many different promises, and been used for purposes of larger organizations, when it comes to grants or when it comes to developing programs. And you see a lot of communities are weary of big institutions, and big institutions coming in and setting up shop and then winding up leaving the community in a worse position than they were in some senses. So I knew that, by working with Barry, that I was going to be working with someone who had integrity, who believed in this work, and who, if he told you something on Monday, it wasn't going to change on Friday. It was going to be the same on Monday. It was going to be the same on Friday. And it was going to be the same in 2 or 3 weeks later down the road. And that was very important, because I couldn't go into communities not believing that. I couldn't go into communities and say, hey, we're thinking about doing this thing, and how can we be of service to you, knowing that that it could all fall apart and when the wind changed. So having someone that stood for this, that wasn't doing it for any personal gain, any personal aggrandizement, that was doing this because they knew that this was how you build community. Barry and I, coming out of, we both had that background of New York City, but more than that, we had a background of working at the Public Theater. We shared a common language, and Karen Ann, you're there now. You know what that language is. Everybody speaks it. So we knew how to go about building this relationship. When I got here, Barry had spoke about some of the relationships that we had with communities, and that we had a huge grant to start this work. We didn't know exactly what we were going to do. We knew that we were going to listen to people, we were going to listen to communities, and you were a big part of that, going around and finding out what communities themselves actually wanted, and not being prescriptive and not saying, well, this is what we want to do. It was important that we had buy-in from communities and did what communities wanted us to do. So that all helped to lay the groundwork when we were looking for some assistance in doing this social justice roadmap.
Great. Yeah, listening. I think that's one of the big points that, and like you're saying, laying the groundwork. So all this work had been done, or had been what you've been about up until March, and then we shut down in March. And then we have, Ahmaud Arbery, we have George Floyd in the beginning of June, and then the protests happen. And then just immediately following the protests, We See You Watt, which is We See You White American Theater, for those of you that are not familiar with this sort of social media, I don't call it campaign, but really movement that has begun, that really, literally in black and white, put out some really hard truths all in one place, for the theater and for the theater industry to sort of digest. And so I'm really curious, for you all, what happened? I mean, what about it? Was it jarring for you? Did it inspire you? Did it propel you? What about this moment in time helped you get this?
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Well, a couple of other things happened alongside the arts engagement work, without which We See You White American Theater, I think, would have impacted the globe in a different way than it did. It still impacted the globe enormously and with huge power. And not just We See You White American Theater, but the movement for Black Lives and the marches that were on the streets of San Diego, as coming through Balboa Park, where the Old Globe stands. And a few other things happened. One is that the staff, board, and supporters of the Old Globe hadn't thought of it as a place that would make theater in a veteran center, in a refugee center, in a prison. It was a place where you went to see Romeo and Juliet. It was a place where you went to see Guys and Dolls. It was a place where you went to see The Grinch. It wasn't a place that was going to disenfranchised communities and saying, we want to engage you. So there was a 5-year period in which the institution and its stakeholders learned that this was a value at the institution. Then we did, right after we got this Irvine money, we did a values statement exercise where the Globe created a statement of values, a kind of constitution that led to this language about we believe theater matters and our commitment is to make it matter to more people. And one of the values that was key to our value statement, which is on every wall and every office and every room at the Globe, is about inclusion. And then that led to a strategic planning process that the board led, right? So the board in October of 2019 endorsed a strategic plan that had a plank in it about who we want to serve in San Diego. The strategic plan has 3 pieces. It's about the work we do, the people we serve, the resources we require. And that strategic plan started introducing language about theater as a public good. So now everybody at the Old Globe and the city of San Diego understands it in a new way, that we think about theater as a public good. We think about theater as a resource for building community, which they weren't thinking about 10 years ago. And one of the points of the strategic plan adopted in October of last year said, we've got to write an EDI plan. Now, we weren't talking about an anti-racist plan, right? And of course, EDI and anti-racism are 2 different things. But the Globe's board said, this is work we need to do. So when COVID shut us down, and then the murder of George Floyd happened, and then We See You happened, it wasn't the first time that people at the Old Globe had heard about this. It was already being discussed at the institution. Different levels of buy-in for sure. Some skeptical about it, some thrilled about it and on the leading edge. So we were in a place where there had already been a discussion. Also, we had in Freedom a major figure at the institution who's Black, and Jesse Perez, a major figure at the institution who's Latinx, who runs our actor training program, an increasing number of non-white staff, BIPOC staff around the institution. And now at this point, 22% of our board is BIPOC, which wasn't the case 8 years ago. So there was a shared language among the BIPOC community of inside the Old Globe about doing this work, which isn't to say that We See You Watt didn't hit the place like a tsunami. It did, because that 30-page document is forceful and an extraordinary cry of pain. And all of us at the Globe, BIPOC and white, I don't think we understood the pain that our friends and colleagues were in and wouldn't have understood that without that extraordinary document. So again, the Globe was in a place of having these discussions because of an attempt to talk about what we thought theater really is trying to be: public service, public good. And that means all the related things about representation and equity and inclusion and all the other things we're now working on.
Thank you, Barry. Okay. So you, again, more groundwork had been laid now in terms of, so when you talk about community, who is community to the Old Globe? Because I think that's a really important distinction. We've talked about the board, we've talked about San Diegans, we've talked about the BIPOC staff. I mean, who do you identify as community when you were thinking about all of this?
When I think of who's community at the Old Globe, you asked this question, and I remember being asked this question when I first came to the Globe, and I said, everybody in San Diego is our community, and that can, you know, as the largest not-for-profit in San Diego, as the not-for-profit that takes the most resources, we have an obligation. I feel as though it's a moral obligation to be in as much of San Diego as we can possibly be, and in our time that we've been here, it's been important that we're in every city council zone, that we're in East County, that we're in North County, that we're in South Bay, you know, that we're not just in some of the places that Barry saw when he first came here, and that we have deep relationships in every sector of San Diego County, which is a huge county. You know, when I first came here, we talk about the James Irvine grant. We were talking about doing, you know, programs with 4 community partners, and we instantly exploded that, you know, as soon as we really started talking to our community partners, because we had Globe for All, so we could go through and talk to different communities. At that point we were talking to it was a 2-week tour, so we were talking to about 13 different community partners, and they all said the same thing: we need more. You know, we want more. We want to expand this partnership with the Globe. We see the value of it. So to be in just 4 communities just wasn't going to cut it. Our community demanded more from us. So that's who our community are. Our community are the people of San Diego County, and we try to be there for them, you know, as we say we do when we talk about we want theater to matter, we want it to matter to more people. Those things all marry together, you know, they marry together in a way that says, okay, well, you're the biggest, you're the largest, you want to make theater matter to more people. You know, I have a need for it here, I have a need for it in El Cajon, you know, I have a need for it refugee community, I have a need for it homeless community, I have a need for it incarcerated community, I have a need for it senior community, you know, I have a need for it youth communities, you know, so that's who all of our community was. And
so how did you go then from, you know, okay, you have all these great relationships, but then how did you decide to launch, like how did it come up? Like, oh, we need a social justice roadmap. Like, you know, you don't wake up in the morning going, that's our next step in this moment.
No. Well, we had to answer the demands of We See You White American Theater. We had to answer the demands of our own Black and Brown theater making community locally here in San Diego. We have to answer the demands of our own staff. I mean, there are 6 BIPOC staff members in the artistic department of the Old Globe who signed the We See You White American Theater manifesto, right? The people that I sat in an artistic meeting with were signatories of this document. It was just inconceivable that the Globe wasn't going to respond in some way. And again, our own strategic plan had called for an EDI plan. So we had to make it. You know, the how of it, you know, this was, Freedom and I remember the weekend that George Floyd was murdered. a tearful, horrible, painful conversation that the two of us had about how we were going to take a deep breath and hold hands and try and lead the institution through this period. And, the Freedome's leadership it's impossible to imagine how the Globe could have managed it without Freedome's leadership and commitment. And it was just a clear necessity that we had to do something.
And once again, it wasn't prescriptive. We didn't know what we were going to do. Yeah. The only thing that we knew was that we were going to talk to our community. And that's all. That's what we always do. We always just, when in doubt, what should you do? Go out and talk to the community. That's the number one thing to do. And that's what we did. And we took a break from, at this point, we took a break from all of our online programming. And we had convened in February a group of Black artists throughout San Diego. We we had Jitney that was here. We had a lot of Black artists that were in town, and we wanted to just have a conversation with the artists and make some of the artists available to some of the community members, some of the Black artists community, and bring them together. And we hadn't done that before. But when we took a pause and we were going to talk to members of the Black community, we already had been in conversation with over 24 people, and we needed to say, hey, what can we do? What can the Globe do? What's really good? What are we talking about here? And we had a long conversation, and from that, that group of 24 people came back with a page and a half worth of ideas of what the Globe could do to be more supportive of the Black community in San Diego. And that's what we needed. We needed to know, how can we be more, we need help in something, and we need help in living up to our values, and how can we be doing that without you all, and how can we be doing that with you all? So that started a huge part. That was a huge piece of it right there at the beginning, that people had actually said that this is how the Globe can matter to our community more. And then after that, the timeline was, we had gotten that, and then we had gotten the We See White American Theater came after that by a couple of weeks. And then that was just a whole other thing of, okay, these are ideas. But even before that, we had these conversations internally, and it wasn't, I wasn't put in a room where I was like, okay, what do you think we should do? Or the black and brown people of the Globe weren't sequestered in a room, just demanded of how to help the Globe dig out of this thing. Artistic staff, Justin Waldman, he came in with a bunch of different ideas as well, and he was a big part of this thing in the early going.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a big part of it too.
Yeah.
What's, to me, and looking at it, one of the things that's really stands out about this plan is, again, immediately following all of this, a lot of theaters put out statements, right? And then it's been trickling out all summer long and into the fall, which is great. It's great to see people are putting some real thought into it. Most of those statements have been maybe, a couple of paragraphs, a page or two. And essentially, through my lens, it's like, we're going to try to do better. And what stands out to me is that's not what you guys did. Okay, yeah, there's definitely we want to do better. But it says, here's how we plan to do better. And it's measurable, and it's done in phases. It articulates very specific goals. And then it has very specific milestones. And then even from there, what happens is that it goes into all of the different areas of the theater itself and its operation. So, you already talked about the vision, the values, and the practices of the institution. And then there's the artistic programming and the arts engagement programming. It talks about community partnerships and the strength of a network. It talks about production, human resources, hiring, workplace environment, philanthropy. It talks about the money, the training program. So you've got literally, which is why it's a great word to call it a roadmap, because it's literally splitting this out over time. And so it's a heavier document. And so I'm really curious how come, clearly you had a lot of pre-work in a sense that was already there. But how did you get your community to sort of like buy into this sort of timeline of activity?
Yeah, well, a couple of things happened. I mean, normally in the life of the Old Globe, it's a very top-down organization. And many of the initiatives at the Old Globe start with me and Tim Shields, or the senior leadership of the Globe, which would be the 10, the director of marketing, the director of finance, the director of production, Freedom, or even with the board, and then work their way down. But this didn't go that way. This started with the San Diego Black Artists Collective, and then with our BIPOC staff, and then with our artistic department, and then with our arts engagement department. We actually created an open source document and sent the link to the entire staff and said, put in your ideas. So over the course of about a month, this giant list of stuff that we could do toward greater equity, toward anti-racism, just bubbled up from the ground up in a crowdsourced kind of way. And so with that wealth of material, we started looking at it, and it began to separate out. And now there are 9 areas of commitment. And then there are a series of, 6 or 7 discrete goals. And then the Globe, because it's 85 years old and in a very wealthy community, the Globe was able to say, we've got some money to put into this, which is a $2 million investment that the board has made to seed this money over time. And so there was this remarkable period of drafting where Freedom, Justin, me, and then we would reach out to different other groups around the organization, would draft something and put things into groups, and then assign those groups to phases. Well, should this happen in the first year? Should this happen in the second year? And so there was another, month of drafting that went on. And it got to the Globe's board last, which is so different from anything else that the Globe had ever done. And because anti-racism is about changing hierarchies and ceding power, this was an extraordinary kind of exercise in a very, very different way of doing things, which is not to say that it didn't get bumpy when it got to the board. It did, still bumpy, even though it's been out in the world now for a month. But that's how that sort of happened. It's a 5-year plan that happens in a series of phases, that's got a serious investment of money to kick it off and to sustain it over time. And we also already see that the community of philanthropy nationally is saying to theaters and other arts organizations, we want to see you invest in this work. So that's coming into play. It's been sort of a very, very different way of the Globe going about things than we had before. And again, this idea of active listening is central to it.
I'm laughing at some of it because, the Globe is, Barry says it's so true. The Globe is used to doing things in a certain way. It's used to being kind of top down, and people, and I know people would complain about it's always so top down. And then the same people would turn around and complain that, oh, well, why aren't they telling us how to put this thing, why aren't they telling us a timeline for this stuff? Why aren't they telling us what to, so it was a very interesting thing, seeing the transformation in people, because it was, we would brainstorm things and we weren't brainstorming, people would put into the document, senior staff would put into the document. And then we were like, okay, when do you think you can do this? It was totally done in kind of like the way that, that we approach this work and engagement is, all right, well, you said you want to do this thing. Well, how long do you think it's going to take you to get there? And then people are like, well, when do you want it there? Because some people are very used to, like, well, Barry says something and everybody snaps the order. They're like, well, when do you want it? He's like, well, when do you think you can get it there? So then we had all these phases of things, and some people were very much, like, well, how are we expected to do this? They wanted all to happen. Like, no, it's we're going to do this in phases. We're going to think this thing out. We're going to try to say what we can do, what we will do, and then what's going to get done. But it was a very interesting way of doing a document, and I'm very happy of
the other part about it, Karen Ann, is the accountability piece of it. And I'll tell you that was one of the most, painful, sort of wrenching pieces of it, because one of the things we did is we pulled together a committee of Black San Diegans, people who are staff members at the nonprofits that we partner with, artists in the community, philanthropists. And we had a series of meetings, facilitated meetings, where we simply said to them, please tell us your experiences at the Old Globe. And we heard some things that were just stunning about people telling us what it's like to walk up the ramp to our plaza with a ticket in their hand to see a show, and the volunteer usher corps treating them, frankly, horribly, microaggressions inside the building, the experience of artists like sitting on the plaza waiting to go perform and being questioned what they're doing there. But also this extraordinary set of conversations. The Globe has a tech center where our scenery is built, which is in southeastern San Diego, which is the historic Black neighborhood of our city. And 15 years ago, way before Freedom and I got here, the Globe built this building and made a series of promises to the local Black community about what was going to happen in that building once it was built, mostly about jobs and opportunities for the community locally to engage with this organization. And what we found out was those promises had been broken. So I went and read the documents. And I saw, the previous administration of the Old Globe made a series of promises to the community about what was going to happen and did not do them. And there was hurt, and there was anger, and there was disbelief, and a sense of broken trust. And so one of the things we knew, Freedom and I knew, the Tim and I knew, the senior staff knew, is that if we're going to make some promises this time, we'd better keep them, because the breach of faith would be so profound that it would be impossible to recover from. So we built accountability into this so that there was no chance we could break these promises. Every 6 months, we said to everybody, we're going to regather every 6 months. We're going to tell you how we did. If we didn't get to where we said we wanted to go, we're going to tell you why we didn't get there.
Mm-hmm. And we're going to put it up on our website, because sometimes, it was important for us that the words were there, because we're held to what we said we're going to do, but also it doesn't change. Like, people will remember you, I, the three of us can sit in a meeting and we'll all come out with different recollections of what was said in that meeting. But if we have a document that's there in black and white on our website, there's no debate in it. It's right there for you. You can't remember something differently than what was there, than what went through the whole thing.
What's not in there that you wish was there?
Well, the hardest piece of this, Karen Ann, I think, for an organization that's as hierarchical as the Globe, is that kind of democratization of power and flattening of hierarchies. And my own view, as I talk to my colleagues around the country, is that everybody's struggling with this. What does it really mean? Because, for one thing, the 501c3 itself is fundamentally hierarchical. It establishes that there's a board of directors, and the board of directors oversees the executive, and the executive has staff. It's kind of baked in. And that sense of how are we going to challenge that essential hierarchical design of our sector isn't here. And I want to say strongly yet, we're working on trying to figure out how to do that. We're talking to colleagues around the country, not just in theater, but in the whole nonprofit world, as anti-racist thinking is challenging hierarchies and asking us to think about different kinds of organization that are flatter and more equitable and more democratically distributed. That's the biggest thing that's not there, really, because it's going to take a while, I think, for the field to figure out and for the globe to figure out what that really looks like.
Great, thank you.
For me, something that's not in there that I thought, and it's my fault, I got to it later. I got to it late, and it was too late to get it in there. But it was really a calling out specifically of incarcerated populations, and as a goal of getting at. We talk about it in workforce development. I would have liked to have said something specifically more about them. But by the time, look, it was a lot of lifting at that point, and I wish that I was on top of that. That's my own shortfall, and that's the one thing that when I look in it, I say, God, I wish I would have been thinking of that. But that's also, when you talk about having inclusion and diversity in organizations, that's kind of why you have that, so that people can protect your blind spots in these things. But that, for me, that's my own one personal thing. I wish I had been thinking of that more.
One last question I want to ask you all before I go to the Q&A from the larger circle. I will at this point invite everyone, if you want to pop on your videos, you're more than welcome to, so we can all see each other. It just make it much nicer to see the community. But my question for you all is, considering all this work you've done, and I think knowing the deep history of the old globe in terms of Shakespeare, Barry, I know your deep love of Shakespeare, my deep love of Shakespeare, Freedom's deep love of Shakespeare, and how it's typically, I think, used. Do you have thought? Do you have new thinking that would answer our question for the theme of this conference, which is why Shakespeare now? In this moment, why do we continue? Why should we continue? How should we continue to? What are your thoughts about Shakespeare in this moment?
I know Barry has some, but I'm going to go first.
Go first.
I mean, because really, my deep love of Shakespeare is very new. Like, my deep love of Shakespeare has really come by seeing how it impacts communities that we're in. Like, I was very much, like, I got into theater because I was interested in communicating culture and people's and communities' cultures and our shared culture, and I remember that ride with Barry around New York City, and he was like really into Shakespeare, and I was like, yeah, all right, but people are really interested in their stories too, like, but I wasn't like a believer. I was a skeptic of it, and seeing how this work has transformed people, how it brings people's self-esteem up, because it feels like they've discovered something like that's been hidden from them, and that they know it, and seeing so many in so many marginalized, so-called marginalized communities that have been that have been beaten down by society, that have been beaten down by culture. But Shakespeare has been this thing that's been held up on high, and that they get it, and that they understand it, and that they understand it more than some people who are learned in this, and bring in all this depth to it that I frankly didn't see. I didn't see it. It was my community that brought it to me. It was Barry that helped bring it to me. But really seeing the men and women that are incarcerated, and see how they respond to it, and see what it does for them, and see how they talk about how it helps them to discover something in them that they had buried away or hidden away. That's why we do Shakespeare. That's why I do it, because I haven't experienced another tool that gets people into themselves the way that Shakespeare does, the way that them being able to talk about these things that happened 400 years ago and connect it to their life right now, that they can talk about things that they've never talked about to anybody else in this room, things that have happened to them, you know, that they can look at something that Shakespeare's done and they can say, well, yeah, I've been through this, and let me tell you about how I've been through it, and how this thing relates to me, and how this thing would really play out in the world. When people are talking about, you know, when the scene between Romeo and the friar, it was always a whiny damn scene to me until I was in a room with men that had talked about being banished. That's when it was real. When people talk about, you know, I haven't seen my family in 20 years and I'll never see them again. That's when it becomes something greater than. So that's why I do Shakespeare.
By you, Barry?
That's tough to follow. Beautiful. Well, you know, I mean, Shakespeare's been in my life in a deep way for like 35 years, you know, daily. I've directed him, I've taught him, I've written about him, I've read about him. You know, he's really, I can't imagine myself without Shakespeare. And we're at this moment of statues being torn down, statues being toppled, and people I love and respect and admire are tearing down Shakespeare off of his pedestal. And so I'm doing a lot of thinking about it. And what I've been looking at is Shakespeare in progressive era New York, late 19th, early 20th century New York, during the middle of the huge immigrant wave into New York City. Italians, Irish, Jews, Eastern Europeans, populations that at that time were not white, right? Jews didn't become white until the middle of the 20th century. At that point, they weren't white. And so progressive educators were using Shakespeare as a way to help assimilate these immigrant populations, meaning make them white. And it was this paternalistic use of Shakespeare to improve people. And what ended up happening was not that at all. The white people thought, oh, look at how we're improving these immigrants that are coming in, and we're going to make them American by throwing Shakespeare at them. But what happened in the immigrant communities was that Shakespeare became a meeting place, a place of exchange. And the Italians and the Irish were together exchanging culture around Shakespeare. And the Jews were taking their own culture and meeting this crazy new land by in Shakespeare, rewriting the plays, making the plays tell the stories of Jews rather than the stories of Englishmen, right? So what you see in that moment is that Shakespeare is not a thing that comes down onto people with values that should improve them. But in fact, Shakespeare is a site of meeting, a site of coming together, a site of exchange. And when I watch our Shakespeare work, I didn't know this going in, but when I watched the Globe going to an Iraqi Christian refugee community in East County, San Diego, that's what I see happening, is communities coming together. The Globe is there with all of our people, and then the Chaldean Christians are there, and then the Latinx folks who live in the neighborhood are there, and Shakespeare becomes a site of meeting and a site of exchange. And that, to me, is the incredible thing about it, because it's a tool, as Freedom says. It's a tool of some other cultural event happening. And I am thrilled by that, because a new thing emerges that is Shakespeare for real, for sure, authentically, but it's also this other series of forces working together and expressing themselves. And I just thrilled to that, because I find things about myself in it that I didn't know were there. And I find things about Shakespeare in it that I didn't know were there. And I find this incredible sort of multicultural, multi-leveled, multi-layered thing get made with Shakespeare as a focal point of it. And I don't know of any other cultural force, cultural entity that can make that happen in the way Shakespeare can.
Thank you both. I'm going to go ahead and open it up to our first question, which is going to be from Alicia. Alicia, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yeah, hi. And I go by Ellie, if that, anyone cares. But I was just wondering, so Freedom, you mentioned not being prescriptive to communities. And I think that's a great concept. And I was just wondering, what are the questions that you typically ask to a community to not be prescriptive, and how do you find out the needs of the community?
Well, I actually, I came to this work, like even theater. I didn't know that I was going to be in theater. I thought I was going to be a teacher. I used to work, I went to Peace Corps. I was in Ethiopia, and a lot of the ways that I come into communities are based on that work. And it's really just talking to people and saying, hey, do I like you? like, do we like each other? And then you want to find out, like what their values are, like what are you all into? What are you into? Like, hey, so you find out what they're into, you tell them what you're into, like, hey, well, I'm in the theater, like we do theater over here at the Old Globe. We do some work, and then you say, well, what could we do are there any ways that we could work together? What could we work together on? And then you find out what they're, and sometimes they don't know, like they have to think about it, and you come back and you say, well, hey, we're doing a play. Maybe you might want to come, we could do it here and you could check out, we could do it over in your place. And then their people will see it. And then their people will say, hey, we want to do this, and then that's how you make a relationship with them. But you kind of make a relationship based on what your values are, and then finding out, like, what do you all want? How can we be of service? We believe that theater matters. Our mission is to make it matter to more people. How can we make theater matter to you all? And then you just come up with ideas, and hopefully you build something that the people themselves would want. That's it. That's kind of like the whole engagement, 101.
Yep.
You didn't even have to take a class for it. You got it free right here.
I want to ask Nancy. I know you had a question as well. Do you want to pop on and ask about you had a question about the pandemic? Yeah.
Yeah. No, my question. Sorry, I'm a terrible typer, but my question is really. Because of the pandemic, we all have a chance to stop and think about our values as institutions, and I want to know if you feel like the Globe would have addressed a lot of these issues had we not been forced to, with the murder of George Floyd. I'm in Minneapolis, so right here, and with the time afforded to us with the pandemic.
Yeah. Well, first, shout out to 10,000 Things, which of course is at the heart of the Public Theater's mobile unit and the Globe's Globe for All. So, exciting, wonderful, 10,000 Things. Thank you. I think it would have been much slower, for sure. It would have been much slower and more fitful. And without the time created by the pandemic, it would have been harder to do. I mean, we spent 4 months, the Globe hasn't been in production, and we've had a lot of digital stuff going on and a lot of stuff happening on various kinds of digital platforms. But the staff was able to, and the board was able to, and I was able to devote the kind of time to this work that would not have been possible under normal circumstances. So yeah, I think we probably might have gotten there, but we would have gotten there significantly more slowly. I also think that the whole framework of anti-racism, I think, would have arrived much later, because we were going down a road of EDI, which is different, and I think that anti-racism, I'll speak for myself. It was a word I knew, but didn't really understand very deeply. I still am only at the beginning of my study of it, but I was I was listening to the Black community say, no, this is the tool that you're going to need in order to navigate these gigantic, predominantly white institutions through this. So I don't think that would have happened without the pressure of people marching in the streets.
Barry, I just think it might be really good to share, but in your mind, what is the difference between ED&I and anti-racism? Because I think a lot of people sort of grapple with that, because I think in their minds they've conflated the two things. Yeah. So yeah, if you wouldn't mind just talking a little bit.
Karen Ann, I'm no expert, so please forgive me. I'm gonna, tell you what it means as the Globe has applied it, which is that anti-racism is about systems that tend to perpetuate inequitable outcomes, right? That's the big difference. Anti-racism is about how you attack a series of systems that will end up resulting in the lack of inclusion, the lack of diversity, and the lack of equity. And so what our roadmap is trying to get at is dismantling, remodeling, renovating systems that tend to recreate injustice. That's how I understand it. And I don't think we would necessarily have thought about it in systemic terms like that. We were thinking about it in terms of how can we get more participation? How can we get more people in? How can we increase representation? As opposed to how can we look at the barriers that again and again and again and again are making that not happen, and start to dismantle and change and remake those.
Free, what about you? How would you define ED&I and or anti-racism?
Well, yeah, like we went and we all read How to Become an Anti-Racist. Like that was something that we did as a company. Like everybody got a book, and it was like, okay, if we're going to talk about this is what we want to be, then let's go on out and educate ourselves on what it means. And like Barry said, it's about systems. It's about dismantling systems, but it's also about clarifying that there's no world of non-racist. You're either a racist or you're working to dismantle racists. The world of like, no, I'm not a racist. That kind of like that allows you to sit on the sidelines, and in this work there's no sidelines. It's you have to be active in dismantling oppression, and that's what that to me is what being an anti-racist is.
So what does ED&I address then that is different from that?
Well, ED&I, it's equity. For equity, diversity, and inclusion. And that you can have equity, and you can have diversity, you can have inclusion, and you can have equity, but that doesn't necessarily lead you to a place of being anti-racist. So without diversity, you can't have inclusion. Without inclusion, you can't have equity. Without equity, you can't have anti-racism. So I don't know if that answered it.
Yeah, I mean, I think they feel like they're sort of baked into each other. And I think with, and I'm sorry, I've been using the shorthand ED&I. Sometimes it's DEI, sometimes people call it IDEA. But, as you said, equity, diversity, and inclusion feels has become, I think, maybe industry-wide is sort of the catchphrase to sort of help us move into that the direction of anti-racism. Like I feel like those are all facets and tools that can help us, but they're no good if we're not actually looking at the true issue. And the true issue is racism, which is the broader umbrella, the system by which we all live in and operate from, and then all of its and all of its other manifestations that then trickle down into how we work. So so I guess that's sort of, for me, really been, working to separate those things out, because I feel like very much over the years, Edie and I has started to become like the new sexual harassment training inside of institutions. Sorry not to belittle that, but that it's that thing you check, that box you check off every year. And I think anti-racism is really squarely looking at, like Barry said, an actual system of oppression that is actually the foundation by which we all operate and live in the world. So those of us that we all need to understand and be able to see and understand how it replicates itself and how we participate in its replication.
Never stop being anti-racist. It's constant work. It's constant work. And in Kayende's book that he writes, it's something that we always struggle to work for, and that anybody can be racist, anybody can perpetuate these systems, and we have to figure out how we cannot perpetuate them. And that's brought us into having conversations about what is the mindset of the person that we're trying to bring into the organization, because we're not interested in replacing, white faces with BIPOC faces that hold on to that same mentality of racism, that hold on to that same mentality of oppression. How are we changing the mindset, of people that we're bringing into the organization so that we're replicating a culture of that within the old globe?
Very cool. Thank you. We have another question from Jake Merriman. Jake, are you available to ask your question? I'll go ahead and just read it. Jake's question is, how can the work a theater company does in anti-racism influence other institutions?
Wow, that's a great question. It's a wonderful question. I mean, we are so at the beginning of our work trying to do this. I've been moved by other arts institutions in San Diego reaching out and asking us, like, what are you doing? How can we take a look at what you're doing? So maybe one answer to that question is if we can model approaches that will begin to, drop a rock in a pond and the waves sort of spread out. Maybe there's that. I hope also, as we figure out how to attack these systems, then one of the roles of a place like the Globe, and you are totally an exemplar of this, Karen Ann, is that you went from a position at a certain level at the old Globe to a leadership position at the Public. I went from a position at the Public at a certain level to a leadership position at the Globe, as did Freedom. These big organizations export leadership. That's part of the job of a gigantic sort of flagship big nonprofit like the Globe or the Public. And so maybe one thing is that the same way that Freedom said that he and I had a language because we had both been at the Public, maybe decade down the line, there'll be a language about this work at the Globe that people who move out into the field will carry with them. I don't know. It's new. It's a new world, and we haven't come back to life yet, and we don't know when we're going to. So in a funny way, this roadmap points in a series of directions, but once live performance begins again, we don't know how this is going to quite work its way through. So I don't know, Jake, I would say we're all going to stay tuned and keep talking about it.
Our next question is from Maylin. Maylin asks, how do you work on dismantling these structures and financial compensation within the artistic BIPOC staff and artistic staff in order to align with anti-racism, and how BIPOC communities are paid less than their white counterparts? So how do you work on dismantling these structures and financial compensation within the artistic BIPOC staff and artistic staff in order to align with anti-racism? Let's answer that part first, and then we can maybe stretch it from there.
Well, part of our roadmap is a deep dive into salary analysis at the Globe to look at metrics and establish what we're doing in terms of our compensation. so that we know if there are inequities, and if there are, how deep they are. Years ago at the Globe, we did a gender-based study of salaries for the same idea. Is there a gap between, is there a gap along gender lines in terms of how we're compensating people? And we found in some areas that there were, and we made adjustments to salaries in order to address them. So that's something we're doing. We're also, in our roadmap is about how creative teams are paid across our different stages. We have 3 stages at the Globe, plus our arts engagements platforms. And we're trying to, over a period of, I hope, a short period of time, introduce equity into pay scales across those different platforms, producing platforms at the Globe. So the roadmap is asking us to take a look at that, and then to apply financial resources to make sure that we're equitable across the board.
I just, as we were thinking about the anti-racism work and the fact that, the Globe does have programs that have been in prisons in San Diego and jails, and just curious, how do you expect that to meet each other as well, and how important is that to you in terms of ensuring? I know, Freedom, you said that you wish you had put incarceration in that the social justice roadmap. So I'm just curious about, what does that look like? What does that mean for these two things to meet each other in your work?
Can you ask the question? I'm sorry, Karen.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about how are you connecting the anti-racism work and the social justice roadmap into your work in prisons?
The thing that I would have wanted to, we are now looking to actively bring people who have been, and this started about a year ago when we came back from a conference in Northern California, and I had been struggling with it probably a year before that, of knowing that that people were being released that have been affected by our programs, and we had no place for them to go. We had nowhere for them when they came out, and if they came knocking on our door looking for a position, we had no place for them to work. And that became like a waking me up in the middle of the night fear that I wouldn't be able to support folks when they came out, that I wouldn't be able to offer them anything. So we started thinking of how can we bring people in? How can we bring in teaching artists? And we have, we brought in a teaching artist. We hope to bring in more. However, we just haven't, we haven't been back. So we haven't been able to do, bring those folks into our fold more. But now we're thinking of, through this social justice action plan, we're talking about, bringing in young people. We're talking about bringing in people from communities that have haven't been represented at the Globe. So they fall into people that have been incarcerated will invariably fall into those things. My wish was that I had called it out more specifically within it. So we will be having, in the social justice action plan, we talk about internships. We talk about eliminating unpaid internships. We talk about, creating apprentice programs, that will pay people. We've talked about associate artist positions that are paid positions. Our goal is to not have anybody at the Globe, working, we'll have a volunteer usher group, but mostly everybody else that we here at the Globe will have some kind of paid position in the work that they do. The usher program, and that's its own thing, and people receive something from it. It's just not monetary compensation.
Wonderful. We have a few minutes and just enough time for one question. So I want to do just a little wrap up question. And I think the question really is, something for us all to sort of leave with. If there's a piece of advice you have for anyone who is in the process of this work, and that, or thinking about beginning their own journey into social justice around their work. Any advice?
I can tell you a couple of things. One, as I already said, Freedome's presence leading this work, Jesse Perez's leadership of this work, absolutely crucial that there be real BIPOC voices, and yet that it isn't white people saying, hey, you fix it, right? It's got to be a real conversation between white stakeholders and BIPOC stakeholders together. But without real BIPOC leadership, it's hard, I think, to make the conversation as authentic as it wants to be. That's number one. Number two is that it was painful to hear the Black community of San Diego tell stories of experiences that they had at the Globe. And I had one conversation with a donor who's a longtime donor and a real fixture in the community here in San Diego. That was just a tearful, agonizing conversation about her life and her experiences and and not just at the Globe, but in San Diego, in America. And the grace that it took, for the vulnerability that it took for her to want to share that, I felt was uplifting, ennobling, inspiring, So it made me want to meet her pain with a vulnerability of my own. And as I suspect 5 years from now, when we issue round 2 of our roadmap and I look back on this time, what I will remember the most is the vulnerability of being in conversation about this unbelievably difficult subject that has changed me in a deep way. So I guess my advice would be, if I could presume to advise anybody, don't run away from the pain of it. The pain of it is the path you got to walk through, as tough as it is.
Yeah, I just say, it's along that same line, but uncenter yourself. It's not about you. Don't take this personal, man. It's painful and you're gonna grow from it, but you can't go into it being defensive or thinking that people are talking about you. It's not about you. It's about structures that were put in place before you even got on the scene, before you were brought around in this place. So just if you have to uncenter yourself, because it's not about you, it's about the people that we serve, and having people from the community, helping you to figure out what it is would be a big blessing. But these are relationships that are built over years, and they're built on your word. So you have to be really careful with that, and going into it knowing that you can't, once you start down this road, you can't go back. You can't go back. If you go back, you ruin a lot of things. You ruin all your integrity, the integrity of the organization, and how that organization stands in the communities as well. And that's work that has to take a long time to get undone.
Thank you both so much. It means a lot to me personally to have you both here and sharing this. And thank you to all the folks who have been here participating, whether that's as a listener, or asking a question, or just taking in this time and sharing this time with us and carving it out of your life. So I'm very appreciative. I want to say wish both Mary and Freedome, huh?
One more thing. If you are a BIPOC person in your organization and they ask you to do this kind of work, you have to have a really frank conversation with people about, a real honest conversation, man. Like don't take me down this street and then, drop me off and I'm down this street by myself. So if you ask somebody, you got to really, really be into it. All right.
I'm going to say amen to that. All right. Before people start dropping off, because I know we're getting close to our time, I just wanted to give you all a little info on what's next. And I'm going to hand it over to Precious to talk about what's coming up with the conference.
I just want to say thank you to Freedom and Barry for a lively conversation, and thank you for being committed to being change makers in our industry during this time. Y'all are setting a standard for me as a early theater professional follow and to stand my ground in and move forward with. So I appreciate that.
So about youth, thank you.
So next on our docket is actually already up on Sketch, is a moderated conversation with Nia Wilson called I Am Worthy of My Yes. It begins with a guided meditation by her and a moderated conversation with me afterward, and then a little video from the organization Spirit House Incorporated, which is rooted in Durham, North Carolina, and they do a lot of work with those that have been previously incarcerated. You can access everything by Sketch. Everything from this point is going to be on Sketch. I know we've been getting Scott's long emails via Sketch. And so make sure you check there to have all the information. And on Friday, we will be having a Q&A session with Nia Wilson, 3 p.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's key to say. With Nia Wilson, she'll be back. I'll be moderating. It'll be a Q&A. Come prepared with questions. And so that is what is on the docket. Karen Ann, do you want to take us out for the night?
All right. Well, again, just a really great thank you. Looking forward to more engagement, more interaction with everybody here. I just also want to say, I did see in the chat someone asked about if we will be talking about juvenile centers and work with that population. Listen, this is going to be the longest conference in the world. So yeah, of course we are. So hang in there. And no, just honestly, we do have plans. We are also still accepting submissions. So if there is something that you would really like to bring forth, please feel free to send it to us. Again, the planning committee, literally, we're just here to facilitate what you all are really interested in learning and being part of and sharing with each other. We're also hoping to launch some what we're calling engagement sessions, which will be a little bit different and a little bit more social, because we do recognize that one of the best parts about a conference is just chilling at the bar. So while we may not have the bar to chill at, we do have the Zoom. And so we're going to find some fun ways and some great other folks to help us partner in facilitating those. So please just, plan to be part of this again, and we will hopefully see you on Friday. And that's it. We're going to say good night, y'all, and thank you.